Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us, Panthea. And I'm going to hand over to you to welcome and share your opening talk, and I'll be back in a while to do the questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Immy, and thanks so much to everyone for joining. I was really honored to get the invitation from Immy, just knowing what an incredible community Civic Square has built. And I was really honored to be able to get this invite. And yeah, when she first asked me what I wanted to talk about, I basically shot off a regular blurb about my organization's work, the brain work, the big P politics work. There's been a lot going on, and this is, you know, just kind of the immediate thing that seemed to be relevant. But then I saw the lineup, and I saw the topics, and I saw how she and the team were framing these, and I felt something stir within me. And I realized I actually wanted to talk not about organizational work, but about my personal work, the heart work, and the small P politics work. And so up until last night, to be honest, I fretted a bit as to what I would come to you all with today. And because I basically sit here as a woman under great duress and perhaps ready to crack in good ways, I hope, but let's see. And so I initially, you know, this is the third iteration. I'd first called it the end of empathy, but then I thought, who the heck do I think I am, Francis Fukuyama? I think there's only room for probably one East Asian to be making absurd, grandiose statements. And so I decided to call it post-empathy. And this is probably more personal than anything that I've talked about in a public forum. But as the Civic Square team has created this space for us to do this work together, I thought I would take it because I think the struggles that I go through are ones that many others do too. And frankly, I just don't have the emotional energy to try and be impressive or inspiring today. But Farzana Khan, afterwards, I know she will be. So just to situate a little bit where I'm coming from, so that, yeah, just to put my comments in context. I was born in Taiwan to a large, lower income family. My dad's the youngest of 11, my mother the eldest of 7. So I'm basically related to half the country. And we immigrated to Canada at age 6. And I grew up watching a lot of unspoken pain and suffering. My parents had quite a difficult marriage. There was a lot of difficult mental and substance issues in my extended family. And we had the typical immigrant struggles. So I think as a child, I was watching this around me and felt often very helpless and quite sad. And so a lot of my career has been about how to hear and hold space for people suffering and to try and share it with others so that something can be done. This image actually was from a talk that I gave earlier this week, and this wonderful woman named Kate Goodwin, she sort of captured this image, and it struck me when I saw this image that not much has changed in the last 4 decades. I pretty much look the same. And so this work has taken me down a few paths. I've worked as a journalist, a cultural producer, a designer, an organizer, a facilitator. And I guess these are the questions that have continued to haunt me over the course of my work. I'm fascinated by why we deny each other of our humanity. I'm constantly thinking about how do we remain alive to one another's suffering. And I'm obsessed with thinking about how we orient intentions and resources and systems to celebrate the beauty in one another, but also to alleviate and address the cruel, needless suffering that we see around us. And so I have tried to find answers in different ways to these questions. The organization I started 10 years ago, we've done work in, I think, over 40 countries to date around these questions, and usually working with, a lot of my work is trying to sort of find and collect and excavate and share stories. And perhaps unlike my childhood, finally feeling like I have access and agency, perhaps to do something about the stories I hear. So these are some of the organizations and institutions that we have worked with, the ones that I thought had power and agency and ability to change things. And I guess where I'm at today, there's obviously been a lot going on for me just in the world, and therefore for me personally in terms of just upheaval in the past couple of weeks. And so I think I want to share a couple of events, I guess, as I'm trying to make sense of my own sort of upheaval in context of the larger world. Because to the theme of this festival, I guess I feel like I'm waking up in some ways from a dream or fog. And there's been a couple of key signals that have shaken me over the last year that I'm only able to process now in this moment in a new light. So I want to take you back first to about a year ago, about exactly a year ago. I went to see this piece at that was commissioned by the New York Philharmonic in collaboration with London's Barbican, the Malmö Opera, institutions in Rotterdam, Barcelona, and others. And these institutions had commissioned the composer David Lang to create an opera under their Music of Conscience series called Prisoner of the State. And the series was to create art in response to historical events, political unrest, and social turmoil. And it was an opera about carceral injustice. But as I sat there in the audience watching this production, I felt deeply uncomfortable. And I want you to take a look at this image. In this image, I can count perhaps among the prisoners, I can count perhaps 3 Black men, 2, 3, and maybe 4 other people of color. There is one Black person as a main character. He is the prison warden on the right here. And the whole time I was sitting there, I couldn't but think, just 11 miles away was Rikers Island, New York City's main prison complex. For those that may be unfamiliar, the US has about 5% of the world's population, but 21% of its prisoners. African Americans are 13% of the population, but about 1/3 of the prison population. So Black people are incarcerated at more than 5 times the rate of whites in this country. And so as I sat there watching this performance, I actually couldn't understand what I was watching in front of me. This music of conscience, these big cultural institutions sort of wanting to wake us up with this music of conscience. And I also couldn't help but think about Kalief Browder, who was a teenager who at age 17 was put in Rikers for allegedly stealing a backpack. He was there for 3 years, 2 of which he was held in solitary confinement. And then the charges were dropped and he was released. And 2 years later, in 2015, he committed suicide because he had experienced such gross mental and physical and sexual abuse while he was at Rikers. And the city of New York settled this case with his family for a total sum of $3.3 million. And I thought of Kalief when I was sitting there in the audience because I was also flipping through the program. This is just the first page of the program. And I was thinking about that $3.3 million as I was looking through all the donors that give to the Philharmonic and pages of these donors. And it was a hugely disorienting experience for me. What is the cost of a human life? And I was shocked that no one had caught what I saw on stage, but then I went home and I looked at the photos from their most recent spring fundraiser. And I guess I saw the chasm between those that have the ability to gatekeep and to commission and to donate and to prop up these cultural institutions, and then the lived reality of those that are being depicted. A few months later, I was at art and social justice summit here in New York, hosted by the incredible organization Creative Time. And I was watching a talk by called "Why Empathy Won't Save Us," or as she herself has said, informally called "Fuck Empathy." And this was by the incredible art historian Aruna D'Souza. And she started her talk speaking of basically taking us back to November 2016, after the election of Donald Trump, a homophobic, misogynistic, white supremacist, just generally hateful man, where after his election, many started doubling down on the idea that empathy was our path to liberation. Love trumps all, D'Souza says, became the rallying cry. And it placed the personal obligation to understand one another at the heart of a politics of resistance. And it was premised on the idea that greater understanding of the experience of marginalized people would lead the US to a more perfect justice, a more humane society, less racism, less shooting of Black and brown people. Now, as someone with the career that I've had and the way that I'm wired, this resonated with me. You know, make empathy great again. We saw these signs all over. But then she said something that made my heart stop. She said, "I don't want to wait for people to develop empathy for me until I am treated as a full human being." A politics based on empathy imagines justice as something to be bestowed by newly enlightened individuals on other lesser individuals and communities. A politics of empathy allows those called upon to be empathetic to remain in a position of supremacy, doling out justice as a matter of kindness. Yeah, and I think a light bulb went off in me as I thought about, by this point, the thousands of people across dozens of countries and the tens of thousands of hours that I had processed and distilled and made personas and journeys and systems map and found the data and told the data and sat in boardrooms and gone to the White House and just tried to tell stories of suffering, of injustice, just to make people care. Just to make those that have the power and the resources and the mandate to do the right damn thing. And I thought back to all the times that we had come up with solutions that were too narrow or incremental or marginal and slow, with counter arguments around, well, value for money. Paul Farmer has written very eloquently about this. You know, a lot of my work is in global development. We pay lip service to governance and democracy while we prop up dictators around the world, and we pay a pittance in development to absolve ourselves, or in development and foreign aid, to absolve ourselves of our sins for taking resources, suppressing trade, messing up messing up the planet. And I keep thinking back to, what is a human life worth in different countries, in different locations, for different actors that have power and authority. And I thought, no matter how much I contorted myself, getting more data, trying to tell the stories better, the change was just always not enough and deeply unsatisfying. And it started driving me crazy. And so fast forward to today. This past weekend, I was here. This is in front of the Brooklyn Museum, where we had over 15,000 people show up for the Black Trans Lives Matter protests. And this was just a remarkable gathering to witness. 15,000 people gathering for Black trans lives. And the organizers were not asking for empathy. They were asking for recognition. They were asking for solidarity. They brought their community to the front and asked all the rest of us to back up. And it was really powerful being in a crowd this big with a shuffling of bodies where our Black peers and allies and were able to sort of move up, and the rest of us backed away and just were there to sort of bear witness and show support and stand in solidarity. And the Brooklyn Museum is another storied institution with a bit of a checkered past. And I think about all the different ways organizers have been able to address or have been trying to address the historical structural injustices in our cultural and political institutions. I've been big fans of the work of Monument Lab, which has been for years trying to and working to address problematic monuments and statues up in our public spaces here in the US, and petitioning government, doing great participatory sort of research exercises to change representation in the city of Philadelphia and beyond. But we're tired. We're tired of petitioning government. We're tired of trying to help others understand. We are, as Aruna D'Souza says, tired of waiting for others' personal development for it to be okay for us to live our truth. And this is where my energy is right now. This energy is spreading. We want to bypass the institutions, and we want to protest and rebel, rightly. And at the protest, something that also struck me, though, was there was one group that was one activist group that was working to basically buy 2 buildings to create a permanent place to house and support Black trans people here in New York City. And when they got on stage and they said, we had raised $1 million, which was their target, the crowd cheered, and my heart both soared and sank. It was an amazing victory, that we were able to crowdfund the $1 million they needed. At the same time, I kept thinking back to the New York Philharmonic and to this photo or this program. And so I've been doing a lot of processing lately, because I have thought that a lot of my work has been around how to raise the voices and the experience of the long oppressed, and to share them and impose them on institutions of power to make them listen. Because I think, to me, the crowdfunding campaign is incredible, but it often feels like we are left to our own devices and crowdfunding for crumbs for people to have basic dignity, when there are a vast amount of resources that we should be able to better distribute and allocate. And it excuses the institutions and the governments that we all pay taxes to basically, just celebrate our protests here and there, and then to carry on doing their own things. But more and more, it's been really challenging to work in institutional spaces, and I'm grappling with this. Again, these are some of the partners that we work with, and as this upheaval has been happening, I just want to give a quick example. 2 weeks ago, I was interviewing to help a major foundation in my space develop a new strategy. They had invited me and my organization to submit. They knew our profile, they knew our politics, they knew our background. And I have reservations about philanthropy as a field, but I also recognize the potential and role that these types of funders can play. And this one is a big field shaper. So without getting into the details, we put together a really stellar team and a plan. And at the end of the interview, and all of this has been a sort of months-long process, where amongst other things, we'd been sent the agenda with, kind of 2 business hours to prepare. I kind of sat there after an hour and a half, and I was asked the question, don't take this the wrong way, but, and the most senior person in that meeting said, your 3 other white colleagues seem to have a breadth and a depth of experience that I just don't really see in the leadership on the strategy side. So can you help me understand that? And I sat there and I fought back tears, and I fumbled my answer because I was looking at a sea of white faces on Zoom and being asked yet again to answer the question, what do you have to offer? And I could try to explain my experience. I can try to explain my time sitting with pain, witnessing the pain, trying to process and talk about the pain, to present the pain, to contort myself, to explain so that you can understand and then allocate resources and use your power to try and address it. But I can never make you understand that. And I'm sick of trying. And that experience 2 weeks ago started triggering other experiences that I had, I think, I'd compartmentalized and suppressed. I know this is a predominantly UK crowd. And so one that came to mind was about 2 years ago, I was in London for some meetings with a set of partners. And we had one partner that was really excited about some of the work that we were doing, and we were looking to collaborate on some efforts. And they wanted me and my colleagues to meet one of their board members. And so this is where they brought us. It was the Royal Automobile Club in London. And I guess it was, I read up a bit on the history. It's a 100-year-old members club that allowed women in 1998. And we were meeting a board member who also sat on the boards of some prestigious cultural institutions and a host of social institutions, whatnot. So this is an important meeting. So we came through these doors, and this gentleman descended down the stairs, and I was with 4 other colleagues who were white men. And he, I was expecting to shake his hand, being the sort of, I guess, lead of our delegation. But he came down the stairs and shook the hand of every single person except me. And then he said, "Oh, this is strange. I thought there would be 5 of us." The partner that had brought us there was mortified and immediately said, oh, yes, Panthea's right here. She's actually the lead. And I felt the shame and the burning shame and the tears for the next 4 hours as we sat through a perfectly polite dinner. And I was expected to be sort of creative about the work, expansive in my thinking. And all I could think about was, had I worn the right smart attire that I was asked to dress? I had a collared shirt with appropriate formality, smart trousers. And my imagination was just sapped as I was desperately trying to demonstrate that I was worthy of being there. And I'm lucky. I know that I'm lucky because being East Asian, I am regularly discriminated against, but spared the dehumanization that many of my Black peers and colleagues face here in the US. But I keep thinking to myself now recently, why do I keep putting myself in these situations where I am erased, where I am constantly re-traumatized? And I guess I still believe in that we need to change these institutions. We need to not just crowdsource for our crumbs, and that we can bend the will of these institutions. But maybe I'm wrong. Because I think now to Angela Davis, and to this quote has been sitting with me recently. The problem with reform is that reforms have often rendered the institution itself more permanent. And I've often been quite vocal in my criticisms of institutional hypocrisy, but more and more lately, I've been asking myself, has all the work I've been doing, have I just been complicit? Have I been complicit in propping up these institutions that I'm trying to challenge? A good friend, Catherine Marr, who runs the Wikimedia Foundation, recently wrote this on Twitter. And yeah, I guess most of the time when you go work somewhere or work with someone with the goal of reforming it, maybe you're not actually fixing it, and at best you're sort of mitigating its worst impulses, and at worst propping up its power against corrective externalities. So this is something I've been thinking a lot about, my own complicity in the space that I am trying to change. And as I been doing a lot of good reflection lately, and partly with Arati Krishnan, who many folks may know, and just asking myself, have I been recolonizing myself? Final reflection, and I think this will come together. Let's see. I've been paying a lot of attention to the publishing paid me hashtag on Twitter and the conversations lately. Not sure if folks are familiar with this, but basically there have been a lot of writers that have been talking about the amount of money that they are paid in advances. And obviously, advances do not speak anything to the quality of a book or to the talent of the particular individual, but it does put in very stark economic terms whose voices we matter, whose stories and dreams and imaginations we value and will put out there. This was one of the particularly, I think, shocking contrasts. Jemison is a Hugo Award-winning author, and just seeing the disparity between her and another author in the same category, who I don't know, but I'm sure is wonderful. It's been. I actually don't have words to process the feelings that are coming up until I saw this. Folks may know Sam Monastrat, the chef and author of Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, and she said, "I'm filled with rage. Rage I knew I had inside, and rage I didn't, is spewing from within me. I didn't realize how much energy it takes to compartmentalize this much anger, and I've been doing it my entire life." And I think to all the compartmentalization that we've all had to do, all the compartmentalization that we've had to do, all the time that I've spent collecting stories from people, telling them that I'm representing institutions or resources that will be able to do something about the grief and the suffering and the pain that they're sharing with me, and then staring in these rooms in front of these faces, trying to get the data, tell the story, do more research, do the work, being inside these institutions. And I don't know where I'm coming out, I guess, right now in terms of where our energy and our fights and what direction they should head. Because I guess I'm less and less willing to subject myself to this, and yet I also am furious and want to tear down the institutions and the structures and the norms that prop these up. But I think about the work of Brian Lee, an architect, planner, design justice activist, who talks about racism as a complex cooperative system dependent upon its institutions to resign themselves to complicity. These are the very same institutions that I have been working with and through. And more, the second part of this resonates with me. Rebellion is a response to a prolonged dehumanization of a people unwilling to be participants in their own demise. I recognize the role of working within powerful institutions, and I know we have to fight that fight, but it's unclear to me how to do it in a way that is sustainable. But where I have found joy and hope, I mean, this is not very joy or hope-giving, but the publishing industry in the US, about 70% of the people that work in them self-identify as white, And so it is not shocking that this is the New York Times best-selling list and broken down. And so lately, where I've been finding joy and hope is in spaces like these. The incredible poet, Aja Monet, has been hosting these really incredible poetry series called Homemade, where she has been inviting poets and dreamers and warriors to come and share their truths. These are luminaries that traditional publishing often won't give access to and resources to in the same way. And it's been a joy for me to sort of sit with them. And here you see actually in the bottom right corner, Patricia Smith, who wrote an incredible piece today that I'll share in a second. But I highly encourage everyone to copy down the link and to go witness this. And so I'm trying to, I guess, just right now to find spaces where I can be amongst community and sort of with others that are, rejecting institutional spaces and creating their own. And yet I am torn because these are the ways that, this is after the most recent Homemade gathering, and these are the ways that, these artists and dreamers are surviving. And I guess my question remains, how do we then move resources to these spaces? How do we create new spaces? How do we support, cultivate, and nurture the voices of our truth tellers and reallocate resources from these places? Because when you see also what people are writing here, thank you for the remedies, the medicine, the nourishment. This is what we need right now. And I want to be able to create bigger and bolder and more supportive spaces for these to exist. But for myself, I'm struggling with how to do so. And so this is kind of just where I am in my processing. And with that, I will, I wanted to end on a poem, and I'm not sure which one. I actually am a bit intimidated, but I will then sort of read the work of Patricia Smith. This poem called The Stuff of Astounding, a poem for Juneteenth, which we are celebrating here today in the US. It just was published this morning, and so apologies. I don't think I can do her words justice, but I thought it was important to share. Unless you spring from a history that is smug and reckless, unless you vowed yourself blind to a ceaseless light, you see us. We are a sea-shine toddler writhing through Sunday sermon. We are the grizzled elder gingerly unfolding his last body. And we are intent and insistent upon the human in ourselves. We are the doctor on another day at the edge of reason, coaxing a wrong hope, ripping open a gasping body to find air. We are 5 men dripping from the burly branches of young trees, which is to say that we dare a world that is both predictable and impossible. What else can we learn from suicides of the cuffed, the soft targets blackbacks be? Stuck in its rhythmic unreal, time keeps including us, even as our aged root is doggedly plucked and trampled, cursed by ham-fisted spitters in the throes of a particular fever. See how we push on as enigma, the free out loud, the audaciously unleashed, how slyly we scan the sky, all that wet voltage and scatters of furious star, to realize that we are the recipients of an ancient grace. No, we did not begin to live when, on the 19th June day of that awkward, ordinary spring, with no joy in a monotonous, still flecked with deceit. Seems you and these others are free. That moment did not begin our breath. Our truths, the ones we'd been birthed with, had already been met reckoning in the fields as we muttered tangled nouns of home. We reveled in black from there to now, our rampant hue and nap, the unbridled breath that resides in the rafters from then to here. Everything we are is the stuff of astounding. We are a mother who hums snippets of gospel into the silk curls of her newborn. We are the harried sister on the elevator to the weekly paycheck mama dreamed for her. We are Black in every way there is, perm and kink, upstart and elder, wide voice, fervent whisper. We heft our clumsy homemade placards. We will curl small in the gloom weeping to old blues ballads. We swear not to be anybody else's idea of free, lining up precisely, waiting to be freed again and again. We are breach and bellow, resisting a silent consent as we claim our much of America, its burden and snarl, the stink and hallelujah of it, its sickness and safe words, all its Black and otherwise. Only those feigning blindness fail to see the body of work we are and the body we have done. Everything is what it is because of us. It is misunderstanding to believe that free fell upon us like a blessing, that it was granted by a signature in an abruptly opened door. Listen to the 1,000 ways to say Black out loud. Hear a whole people celebrate their free and fragile lives. Then find your own place inside that song. Make the singing matter. So I think that's it for me. And thank you for being here with me to process together.
Thank you so much, Panthea. Before we just dive into a conversation, let's just have a moment collectively, all the people that are out there watching, in what has been an incredibly intimate space, but also not as well, because if we were in the room together and Panthea had shared that, I'm sure we wouldn't be sitting here like this right now. So for the next 3 minutes until 6:15, I'm just going to let us sit in silence to reflect. And you can use the chat to share anything you might have said or done. If you'd been in the room, if you'd been sitting over a coffee with Panthea as she shared that. And the reason I say this is because when I first met Panthea, I invited her to talk about her work. And this vibrant, incredible woman came on the screen and was talking about Reboot and the work. And I'm so glad that's not what she shared today, but what she has shared is really important for us to take a moment. So I'm just going to be quiet and we're just going to sit in the silence, use the chat, and then we'll come back as we ground into a conversation. Well, Panthea, do you feel good for us to have a short conversation before we wrap up and ask a few questions? Yeah, amazing. So I wanted to say thank you. I was just about to say I don't want to have a conversation where we start exchanging stories of philanthropy in spaces. I just want to thank you for sharing so openly and vulnerably. I've certainly known from afar and the email exchanges we've been having, you know, you were definitely like processing a lot, and I'm very, very grateful for you sharing that today, especially around these questions, right, of like how much, like, if we are participating in that system, we are complicit because we have to keep molding ourselves inside, outside, in so many different ways. And that is part of that journey of how do you unlock resources. Maybe you can persuade people there are good people within bad systems. Maybe we can unlock stuff. Maybe we have to be pragmatic as well as revolutionary, and we have to pave the way. And then, as you said, the experiences occur that then make you feel like, is this, you know, am I even on the right side of this journey? And so I wanted to like share with you, you know, that I think that's something that a few of us are really struggling with right now. And like at an existential level, about it keeps me up at night. Do we carry on like this because that's where the resource is, and we need to move that resource to there's like this theory of societal change that we're stuck in, right? And if we just opt out, do we deny the future generations, our children, our communities, with the resources that they need to do stuff? And then what? Where does, in a capitalist system, where does the money and the resource and the buildings and the land come from? And then everything that you said. So I don't want to give any answers other than to say, like, that is real, right? And like, it's through so many mistakes and moments and things where you're like, I've created harm here, and that wasn't even what I was trying to do, and how have I ended up here? And so much of what you talked about is why we end up there, because we're playing games, right? And I always think, if I've created harm, I want to know that I've created it because I did something, as opposed to because I was trying to do something within a system that was never trying to help me be a collective, open, like, leader. It was trying to make me run to the top of the hill and put a flag and having won the race, right? So I just want to say I see that, and I'm not going to say anything other than thank you, because we need to have these conversations. And so I wanted to kind of, and I don't have much questions from the audience. People have shared things. I might read a few of them out, and I can understand why there's no questions, because I think people are just trying to say, we see you and this experience, and you know, are grateful for the honesty and sincerity. So I just wanted to ask, what next, right? How do we process these conversations? This is such an important conversation in order for us to liberate ourselves and actively make a decision. One of my team members always says, I want to be able to choose that I stepped into doing what I did, right? I don't want to just be like, just caught up in, I just have to do this. I want every day when I wake up to be a choice. And so I'm just interested in, where are you at now? What are you thinking? What's the next step? How do we both respond to the urgent needs? And I know you've spoken of them so much, even just in your neighborhood. So how do we do that? And how do we think of this broader, more revolutionary liberation of our souls and the work we're doing, and where we're getting money from, and who we're even spending time with in order to do that work? So yeah, do you want to just share a little bit just in what's next?
I have no answers, which is why this felt, but so thank you for creating and holding the space, and to everyone sort of chiming in and sharing. I've never given a talk like this, but it's, I think Immy could sense there's a lot of upheaval going on lately. So it's, because I think also you want to, I think in the spaces that we work in, you don't want to be angry, emotional, hysterical woman, you know? And so there's that, you know, you're trying to sort of comport yourself in a way that is, you know, like I gotten the dress code right, I have my blazer, you know, and you sort of put your game face on, and we don't have these spaces to be able to talk about these experiences. And I want to be careful to not center my experience because I'm relatively privileged. And so it's just hard to know sort of where and how to talk about these. I mean, just where I am now in this, I'm still sort of in the muck of it. And so again, I appreciate everyone also sharing here. I don't know. I think that on the one hand, I think on the one hand, a lot of the groups that I work with, and I think one of the fair criticisms of the U.S. progressive movement has been that it is sort of relative. It's quite fractured. There's not always a coherent agenda. We're not sort of well institutionally integrated, whatnot. And it's true. I mean, if you think about, the Supreme Court in the U.S. has had quite a week and some pretty sort of astounding and wonderful wins. But you know, you think about the conservatives in the U.S. have played a decades-long game of, you know, organizing within local government, stacking the Supreme Court. These are the, you know, work of sort of long conservative think tanks like the Heritage Foundation and others. And so my intellectual answer is that we have to be better institutionally integrated. I don't want to be crowdfunding for crumbs. I want our community and our side to be able to have the resources that they do. And I want us to have our agenda sort of in the policy fora, which then means we need to learn how to speak their language and play that game and move the resources and, you know, and have sophisticated advocacy agendas and know how to work the minutia of bureaucracy that have been designed to keep us out, have been designed to be intentionally difficult to understand. I sit usually with, you know, pages and pages of just like technocratic, like crap. And so in my head, I know that's kind of the work that needs to be done, but just more and more. And I think because the current moment, we are able to have these conversations and openly about the trauma that we've all experienced and faced. It's also just, there's part of me that just like wants to give up on doing that. But then I think, well, if I and others I know sort of give up, then, I mean, I don't know. It feels like that's an easier answer because we say rightly that we have to take care of ourselves before we can take care of others. And at the same time, I don't know. I don't want to back away from this fight, but it also, these conversations about sort of that foundation exercise, it's all been really difficult, and I don't know where the spaces are to talk about it. I was asked the other day to write a letter to a prominent foundation in our space about what many there saw as structural embedded racism that, you know, has been termed implicit bias and DEI, because those are the polite ways to talk about it. And I will do it. But it's, as you all know, it's exhausting to sort of have that fight to be the person that is like, you know, crapped on and then doing the work of education. So I don't have any answers. I'd be curious how others are thinking about this question. Well, I know the work that makes my heart sing, and that is not the work that I'm doing, but I know from a political economy analysis, this is the work that we need to be doing. So I don't know, Immy, I don't know how you and others think about it.
No, I think this is great. Like, and I say that without fetishizing the conversation. I don't mean it's like great. Well, what a great night we've had. Like, it's so. I love the fact that you've just come on here and you're sitting in paradox, and you're sitting in the plurality of like, what the F do we do right now? And you're speaking from your heart and not your head, because I know your head and your heart combined. And, you know, for those in the audience, go to the Reboot's website, look up Panthea and see the exquisite, endless work that she's done over such a long time. There's no even denying that. The confidence to come on here and say, you know what, I'm just going to use this space to talk about this, I think is really important. There's no way this festival or this talk can create an answer to that. Because this is something that we need to unpack, right? Like, we've also spent, I don't know how old you are, but, you know, I've also spent nearly 30 years of my life learning that this is what we do, right? We go to school and then we do this, and then we do this, and then we'll do this, then we do this. And, you know, it's so, of course, like in half an hour, in an hour, in the middle of a global pandemic health crisis and an uprising to topple racial injustice and racism, we're not going to like find all the answers. What I do want to say is that I know that there's a lot of people grappling with the same question. And so what I would like to ask you as we step out of the session is, you know, what could this audience help with? And what I was about to say was one of the things that I think would be great on this. And when I say great, I say that with not anything loaded other than what I think would be a good next step, is we should host a bit of a closed space in a few weeks after the Department of Dreams, just unpack it, right? And the power of having a space to say, I don't know what to do with this. I think I'm complicit here. I think I'm taking up too much room. I think I'm fighting for resource, but I don't know if I should be in the pockets of these people. Or when I have got resource, these people then feel like they're owning me. And now I feel like I don't know what to do. I feel stuck pulling out, because if we give up, then what happens next? And what about the resource? I feel stuck carrying on because it looks like I'm bulldozing, and you have to bulldoze in order to survive in those systems. You also have to replicate the system, right? You have to be confident, and you have to step in, and you have to be like relentless, and you have to ask for money, and you have to demand money, and you have to keep showing and over showing, and you have to show more than anybody else. It has to be better and more ready and more beautiful, and you have to fight to not show people's pain as a way to then get resource, right? So you don't commoditize people's pain, because those people are your communities. The whole reason why you started this work was because you wanted to be in solidarity with them and the collective struggle or a liberation of that work, right? I can say that more on behalf of being like a Sikh woman, and like my previous iteration of work, which was much more in state-sponsored violence against the Sikhs in India particularly, right? You have to like stop, and you have to explain why you're not going to fetishize the pain and the struggle and the sad pictures in order to get the resource. And so anyway, right, like this is a revolving cycle, and the second that you're in it, and I'm not going to share them now, but I could share so many stories where I want to say, I think I'm freaking complicit and I don't know what to do now. But if I stop, then what, right? And do we, and this is another question, because I do we use the skills we have to do the work we need, that we're good at doing, right? So if within an ecosystem we are good at that, being that person, being the person who's like negotiating that with the institutions and whatever, and then if we do decide that and it's a choice, how do we wrap around each other to support each other for the multiple, like, I mean, I've got this like really bad memory problem, and as you were talking, I was like really great. I was thinking, you know what? One of the really good things about this memory problem that I've got through like just a bunch of stuff is that actually I can't remember the amount of dinners and the amount of things I've been to where and someone would tell me, do you remember that time you went to that shit dinner with me and this happened? Or do you remember that time we were in? And I'll be like, oh yeah, I remember that. And I feel like that's actually a good thing, because it's just washing over me. It also means that I forget important things, which is also not great. But what I think is we need to open a space where we can hold this, and just discuss it, because of course we're not going to overnight be either complicit or not complicit in a way in the whole world. Like non-Black people of color and white people are complicit in pretty much everything that oppresses Black and Indigenous peoples if we're talking about intersectionality, right? So the answer of complicity is not going to be answered overnight, but creating the space for that to have these honest discussions might be a good start. And that's the only thing I have to offer to this Panthea, other than I understand the paradox. But I wanted to close with asking you, well, there's what beautiful comments everyone's sending. What can an audience, what should we do, right? What's your maybe ask, or something that you might want to like ask of the audience, or each other, or me, or Department of Dreams, or the world? We might just want to be like, thanks for listening, bye.
I'm in the middle of the mess right now, and I appreciate everyone chiming in. Cass is saying sort of about the anger that we're feeling. I think anger is never an emotion I think I've let myself feel, and this is other things that come up for me recently. And because people will say, just to your experience, when you intentionally forget, feel like, oh, you're so resilient. When things, knock you down, you just bounce back up. And I think in many ways, kind of put the anger away, compartmentalized. And so if you're like, you're so resilient, 10 years of running this, all the things. And it's kind of like, I don't want to be, I don't want to be resilient. Resilient is a way of talking about people that just, it's like normalizing all the knockdowns that we get in ways like, well, you're just going to bounce back up and it'll be great. I don't want that to be admirable. I want you to stop knocking us down. I want you to stop asking us to perform our trauma and get our communities to perform their trauma to get change. And so I don't know what the ask is. I guess it is, I think a question that I've been reflecting on and just asking everyone to reflect on is, how do we think about our own complicity in the structures that we are trying to tear down, because we know we need to have a foot in and be able to look and talk and act in a way to be able to get access and credibility and whatnot. At the same time, at what point, how do you know when you've gone too far is the right term? How do we sort of, hold our ground and realize what we stand for? And while we're in a very disorienting space that is asking us to contort ourselves to cede to its norms and demands. So I don't know. This question of complicity and of guilt has been sort of on my mind, but then beyond just dwelling in it, then okay, how do we use that energy? And I think this community that you have here is so beautiful. And I'd love to find ways to just continue the conversation with you and with others, because I think there is, I've always believed in harnessing moral outrage. And I think there's particularly a kind of anger that is coming up right now that I think can maybe be constructively channeled. So,
thank you so much, Panthea. That was a beautiful end, and I agree. And you know what, I absolutely love the let's just sit in this, right? Because we don't know, and let's be honest with that. And we're going to work through it, and we're going to figure out. And when we do, we're going to choose what we do next, and we're going to choose it having processed and reflected on what's happened. And perhaps we're just not going to be as polite about the stuff that's happening at all. So I want to say thank you, and I think it's the right time to say I'll definitely unmute you in a second for you to finish off and say bye to everyone. But I was going to say, actually, if this has affected you, or you think I want to think about this a bit more, really conveniently, the workshop with Fazana starts at 7 o'clock, and I'm just going to read out actually what the workshop is so you can understand. Fazana Khan is one of the founders of Healing Justice London. And her work is profound, right? And as one of these like resilient, nothing affects me, I'm just gonna like carry on and I'm gonna be okay and I'll process by myself. Meeting Fazana really has changed me. And she's going to be doing a workshop on dreaming in and ways of being, on transformative justice and liberation practice. Fazana will be sharing narratives from her work, The Revolutionary Mothering, surviving in violent times, should actually be doing readings. There'll be moments to write and reflect, or just to sit in silence. She holds spaces incredibly. So if you just come and want to sit in silence, you can. If you want to come and write and whatever, like that's there. Of course, if that's not right for you right now, that's also completely okay. But I just want to say it's there, and there will be lots of other things like this that Daniel and Cynthia from our team will be hosting in the weeks afterwards, just like we have been hosting reflection activity in the weeks before. And a shout out to Cass Humphreys-Massey, who's in the chat. They are also going to be involved in that. And if you don't know Cass is a thanatologist. They deal with grief and trauma in a number of different ways. So like let's turn this into something. Let's turn this into like prolonged care and support for each other. And Panthea, thank you for creating the space and sharing so courageously and openly about where you're at. And I want to say that, you know, there's a lot of work you can check in of Panthea's to know why she's able to talk like she is about why this is also, not that she should have any justification of why she can, but she really has been doing some really profound work over the last decade. So support that too. And last thing, when someone shares something like this, I always think that it's really important not just to check in today, but to check in, you know, 6 months or a year from now to say, I'll be there for you next year as well about this same thing. And I feel like that as someone who's going through some grief, you know, and the initial beautiful response. And I still do remember that 2 months or 3 months or 4 months down the line, it's also important to check in with each other. So on that note, I'm going to unmute and say thank you so much, Panthea. And I don't know if you wanted to say bye to everyone.
No, I just want to say thank you again. I've never talked like this in a public forum, and I think it's because the space that you and your team have created for us to have these conversations, and so I'm deeply grateful. So thank you. And thank you to everyone for just writing in the chat. There's some really incredible comments that I want to just sit with and process. And so thank you for sharing these examples. I'd love to reach out and have some follow-ups. So thank you for this.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.